Hello and welcome to Dinis Guarda Cities ABC series. We are a fast-growing YouTube podcast thought leadership channel focused on profiling the global leading inspiring leaders, CEOs, authors, technologists, and academics that are changing the world and coming up with new solutions for the problems we're facing. We highlight ideas, products, inventions, software, books, and solutions to the multiple challenges, and as well looking at how can we look at the problems as there's always an angle from the problem to the opportunity that it comes with it, and how can we look at this from the perspective of cities. We all live in cities and nations, and of course, especially the advent of the fourth industrial revolution, all the tools of digital transformation, and as well the areas of AI, blockchain, we are facing more challenge than ever. This YouTube and podcast series is distributed through our platform, citiesabc.com. That is precisely a platform for cities and for citizens. And our goal here as well is to reunite ways and as well coming up with insights that can help and inspire everyone around the world, especially in the ideas of business and entrepreneurs. The series are distributed in the openbusinesscouncil.org, intelligenthq.com, then in Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, and other channels that we are working and promoting. So in a time of emerging tech disruption, I think we have a lot of challenges, and especially one of them is productivity. So this talk and this interview will be with Simon Hedaux, that is the founder and CEO of ReThink Productivity. And he is an author, speaker, and as well a strategist that has been working in methods that allow to rethink efficiency, boost productivity, and optimize budgets for companies, both corporations that are quite big, but as well SMEs and startups. ReThink has been transforming the way the world's biggest companies operate, redefining their processes, reviewing systems, analyzing change impact, and ensuring they're operating at maximum efficiency and productivity levels. And Simon has an unrivaled expertise in these areas, but as well is looking at the tools, how to improve customer experience, operating model challenges, and structural leadership teams, and deliver business objectives. And he's been working with leading companies. Among some of them, we can look at from Vodafone efficiency methodologies to a lot of other companies on these areas. And he has, for instance, case studies like Debenhams and the mainstream companies that have been working in terms of managing and optimizing their systems and solutions. So welcome to our series, Simon. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you. No, thanks for inviting me on.
So Simon, I'm a productivity geek myself, and I always try to make sure that my time is managed in the best time, and as well that my team as well, but it's increasing more and more difficult. So I think especially with all the digital distractions, with all even just the fact that, for instance, now with COVID, we cannot deal face to face. We have challenge in terms of sometimes I say one thing, but it might be perceived in a different way. We are using technologies like Zoom and others, but this is increasingly more difficult. So I would like to understand, how did you come up to become a productivity guru, and as well creating a company and an organization to face these problems? So could you tell us a bit about that history?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is working in retail shops. So DIY is where I started, and had a Saturday job working on the till, and then worked my up to manage a number of stores in England. And from there then went to work in the head office to roll out a workforce management staff scheduling solution. So that was my first real insight into the world of productivity and how it's managed through technology. Then from there went to work for Boots for a number of years and managed their productivity team there. So looking at all the productivity initiatives, the way that the stores budget, and all the things that hang around that from a retail and pharmacy point of view. And then 9 years ago, got the opportunity to set up ReThink. So we kind of saw a gap in the market where there was lots of high-end consultancies that were dealing in very big picture stuff. So lots of things around productivity that were difficult to understand or difficult to implement. And we saw an opportunity to deliver that through more practical advice and data insight. So yeah, been going for 9 years. Love, like you, all the productivity geeky stuff, data, all the other bits that are driven there, and I've worked with some great clients across the world to date.
Oh, amazing. So I think before we go to your company and as well the work you've been doing, so one thing very precise. So in terms of your career highlights, and as well, how did you come up to build what you build and being working on this in the last 9 years? Can you tell us a bit about your education? Because I think it's very important to demystify the education of people like us, because for instance, I came from language and literature, and I ended up actually building technology and doing thought leadership in a lot of different areas and building AI and software. And I'm sure in your case, it's very different. It's very similar. So you mentioned that you work with the big stores and here in the UK with a lot of mainstream retail platforms. But can you tell us a bit about that evolution, your personal evolution as a professional, as a CEO?
So yeah, I mean, I've always been in kind of leadership and management roles in big organizations. And then from a personal point of view, when I left Boots, that was my first, I suppose, entrepreneurial role, setting up ReThink. So from there, done lots of thought leadership worked with lots of other CEOs in different businesses, small, medium and large, to kind of learn from them. So my development's been, I suppose, some self-taught and then some learning off people in the industries, retail, hospitality, tech, where they've had some great experiences. And also you can learn from watch outs from them of things that they've tried to avoid over the years and pitfalls they try and help you avoid. So for me, learning off network and self-learning have been the two bits since we've started to kind of run our own business.
So thank you. And one question right now, going to rethink and all your work in the last 9 years. So in the last 9 years, if you look at, well, first of all the business world has been going through the biggest transformation ever. And although we had the fourth industrial revolution, which we are going through, but if you look at the last 10 years, probably we have more, especially disruption than in the last thousands of years of history of mankind. Because, well, first of all, I'm not even talking about COVID-19, because COVID-19 brought another element. So how do you see this kind of challenge in the last 9 years, especially with digital right now transforming all our lives? Let's say, I remember that when I started my company, which was as well 9 years ago, I had this kind of interactions with big corporations, and because I was more digital savvy, I thought everyone was with me, and I got to the conclusion that, and I think this is actually official statistics, that for instance, in the UK alone, where we are both based, I think 68% of the companies don't even have a website. And this is just one metric. If you go worldwide, probably it's 90% or more. So we are facing a lot of disruption. In one end, we are in an economy completely digital. On the other end, we are as well looking at SMEs that are mostly managed by people, individuals. They're working for corporations or contractors, or as well like the pops and mums of this world. So how do you see this kind of landscape where we are? And as well, why did you create Rethink Productivity? I think it's particularly important to look at the two things.
So I think the landscape of where we are, if we think about that 9-year kind of journey from when we both set up our businesses, 9 years ago, we were on the cusp of bring your own device. We were on the cusp of automation, big CRM systems coming into play, but there was still lots of paper about. So certainly in organizations, head offices, and in their then stores, chains, hotels, restaurants, they were dealing with lots of paper. There was a big drive to digitize that, so to remove paper and put process online or into tablets or phones or whatever it might be. But a lot of that wasn't particularly thought through from a process point of view. It was very much this is the paper form we've got, we'll put it online and all our problems will be solved. When actually what we saw, and again, one of the reasons why we set up ReThink, so we could start to help people understand how long things take through our studies, and then where the opportunity to streamline or reduce those process times were, was that actually all they did was exactly that. They moved paper into a digital platform, but didn't solve any of the issues around how that was structured, the data flow, if there was any sign-offs for that work. It was just to pick it up and remove the paper and make it digital, how it was presented to the users, all those kind of things. So they just really replaced one problem with another. And through that 9-year journey, what we've seen is, again, there's more and more data that gets pushed to people. So there's more data for people to consume that takes up more of their time and takes that away from the core aspects of their job, whether that be frontline customer facing or dealing with other parts of the organization. And they've now got to decide which bits of those data are important, which bits are optional, if you like, and which are irrelevant, because there's so much data to consume. And we see lots of organizations where they push everything out to everybody, and all of a sudden they become less productive because they're involved in processes, deciphering information that doesn't really impact their job or doesn't need to be dealt with urgently. So we've gone from a very much paper, non-digital way in the last 9 years to almost fully digital in lots of organizations, but with a real challenge of how you decipher and segment that data and do something that's useful with it, or only provide data to certain groups of people that's important to them. And people are right at the start of that journey now in terms of data segregation, looking at groups of users or by user role and type to only present them with data they need to action or that's important to their role. And back to the second part of the question. So the reason we set up ReThink was absolutely to help people with actionable insight. So we do lots of study work in hotels, restaurants, coffee shops, offices, looking at the processes people are doing, how long they take, where that sits in our benchmark data, and then how much of those processes are potentially what we class as non-value add, where you've got slack in the process, i.e. people could work quicker to get it done, or there's parts of those processes that add no value to the individual or business. So yeah, it's been an interesting 9 years, and I think we are in a digital age, as you say, but actually that's caused just different problems for people that have gone from paper-based or non-digital ways of working to fully digital.
Let's go to the I think the matrix of all of this. So the definition of productivity, I think that's very interesting, especially you as an expert and as well a person that's been working on this for a decade. You know quite a lot about this. So let's define productivity. How do you see productivity? I think this is particularly important because I'm sure, and I think for this, I have a struggle as one thing is me personally as an author and as well as a CEO. The other thing is me as a CEO and managing a team of people around the world. And so how can we make the balance between productivity, personal and professional? And as well, even defining productivity, because for instance, sometimes, let's say if you have a bit more of a profile of perfectionist, you might really spend a lot of time working in something that might take an entire day and something that doesn't create, you think you are being productive, but you're not. So it's something that I would like to hear from you. How do you manage all these different things, especially with big corporations where there's a pressure for results and the pressure for change and the pressure for even, well, a lot of sales and things like that?
Big corporations look at what we class as labor productivity. So where they're a big retailer, if we use that as an example, they would look at how their store colleagues are interacting with customers. What things stop them from interacting with customers is becoming more important. So if you think of it, a typical shop, they'll have things to do like putting stock on shelves. There'll be some admin work around cash handling. There'll be all the people parts of management, so performance reviews, appraisals, potentially disciplinaries, and all the people side of things. So their productivity will be around how long do those processes take as an average. So they'll look across a range of people doing the processes or different types of stores. What's the average? Where's it done quickly? Where's it done slowly? So what are the outliers? And what makes a difference in those environments? So is it done quickly because they found a better way to do the process, or they've got different equipment, or adversely, they're doing it quickly because they're not spending time with the customer. So quickest isn't always best. And again, is there a correlation for those stores that take longer doing a particular process of, do they generate more revenue? Are their people happier? Have they got better customer scores in terms of customer satisfaction? And then they'll start to pick that process apart and look at where the opportunities are to take parts of the process out, to streamline it that don't impact customer, or to benchmark stores to challenge the input versus the output. So productivity all comes down to an input, whether that be number of emails you can write per hour, to an output, whether that's sales generated, meetings booked, whatever it might be. So measuring productivity is different in different environments. But from a personal productivity point of view, there's lots of different sayings. So there's been a busy fool, isn't there? Of you could send 1,000 emails in an hour, but if the content isn't very good, it's not to the right recipients, you're not getting the right responses. Yes, you've been busy, but you've not been productive because there's no outcome or output from that. So we can use it in different environments and talks about it in different ways, but simplistically, the measure is how much work have you done and what was the output from that work. So just because you're busy doesn't mean you're productive.
Coming back to the methodologies that we apply with ReThink Productivity, I saw that most of your case studies are with massive companies. So can you tell us the process and the way you work with the company ReThink Productivity and all the work you do with these companies?
Yeah, sure. So we'll have an initial inquiry or a conversation with an organization to understand what their perceived problems are. So do they need to save money? Do they need to take that out of the budget, so operate with less people? Actually, do they just want to find ways of spending the same money differently? So maybe with more time spent with customers to try and generate more revenue and sales, or potentially a bit of both. So organizations at the moment, the world's a strange place, are in very different places, but most want to do a bit of cost saving and a bit of reinvestment into service. So we'll then try and understand how they operate. So again, let's use a coffee shop example. We'll spend some time in their shops, and they might have some town centre shops, some city centre shops, some shops that are drive-through. And we'll, with our analyst team, we'll spend some time with their team looking at a number of things. So we'll look at, as an overall, how their teams are working. So across a number of days, how much time do they spend with customers? How much time do they spend doing tasks, and then how much ineffective time there is? What times of the day do they get queues, and then correlate that to how many staff we're on and look at the staff plans and rotas. We'll spend some time looking at each of the tasks that they perform. And as I talked about in the previous part, we'll get an average time per hot drink, potentially per cold drink, per drive-through drink, by measuring a number of those activities across a number of sites. And we'll also spend some time typically with leadership roles. So a day in the life with the store manager or the assistant manager, or in a coffee shop, the head barista, just looking at across the day, what things do they get involved in? How much of that time's management? How much of that time's with customers? How much of that time's with colleagues? And again, how much of that time is non-value add? Then we'll go and crunch all that data, and we'll go back to that organization with a presentation of, this is what the data is telling us. This is how your people are spending their time. This is where we see the opportunity. Now, that may be in organizational design, i.e. your leadership team is too light or too heavy, or not placed correctly across the different types of stores in the estate. This is where your teams are working really hard and they're doing a great job, or even in some instances working too hard and they might need more break or more downtime. This is where you've got opportunity, and that opportunity is normally in kind of three key areas. So process, the way things are done; people, so how quickly they're working; and technology. So actually, we work with lots of organizations, and I'm sure you'll see it, where there's a big wait at the end of a transaction to print the till receipt, which is fine if there's no queues. Actually, if you've got a very high throughput, it can add seconds to your transaction time, which makes a big difference over the year. And then for some of those organizations, we'll take all that data we've measured, we'll work and get some business data from them. So sales, delivered units, items, opening hours. And by shop, we'll build an Excel-based labor model where by week, with the data we've got and their forecast volume data, we can start to predict how many hours they'll need by store, by week, by role, and therefore the associated cost, which gives them a way of predicting hours and cost spend. But also when they start to make changes to that business, so they may get a new receipt printer, which is a couple of seconds quicker, they can update the timings and then see the financial and hours impact of those productivity process improvements.
These areas that you just mentioned, and as well from your experience working with multiple companies and a lot of big corporations, is there any kind of trends that you find? And of course, data the identification is key, but I think especially the management of expectations is the most important, and as well the results. So what trends do you see across your work in all these different areas that you've been studying, and as well with the companies that you've been collaborating?
So there's a couple of key trends that we typically see. One, in retailers or hospitality companies that have got lots of outlets, their plans of their staff, so how they rota and schedule their teams versus their customer demand. So when customers are checking in a hotel or going for something to eat in dinner, or in retail coming in to buy, doesn't necessarily correlate to when they have their staff in. So they're not at their best when they're at their busiest, which potentially means you have to wait longer in a queue, or you get less service time because the store teams are stretched. So that's a common theme of poor alignment of customer to plan, and typically generates poor customer satisfaction and lost revenue. People don't like to wait for very long, or if you've got a specific question for a colleague and you can't find one, you potentially will go somewhere else. There's always, as well, we tend to find businesses have an idea or a perception that they spend lots of time with customers. And when you actually come back and clarify, over the course of X days from the study, you spent 25% of time with customers, they're generally surprised that it's that low, and very, very interested at what's getting in the way then. So what things, and it's typically admin and paperwork or digital paperwork, is getting in the way of our store leaders or our colleagues to stop them being with customers. So that's a really interesting part of our work when we get the data, is to help them understand these things may happen either very frequently but are a small time, or happen very infrequently, but when they do happen, they take up a long piece of time. How can we avoid that, digitize it, change the process, improve it with a new system? So that's another trend we see. And probably the final one, which is interesting, is variation. So again, lots of organizations really strive for compliance and for people to do the same thing at the same time across the estate. But our data typically shows that people do different things at different times across the estate. The journey and the experience from a customer therefore becomes inconsistent. But also the range that the same task may take 1 minute in one store and 10 minutes in another, which comes back to some of the digital pieces around how you train people in a consistent way. If you have an online training, learning management system platform, rather than people being taught locally how to do a process, because that's where you get massive variation, because there's always a slightly different way in each outlet of doing that process. So they're probably the key themes we see in that quest to drive either a cost saving and or more service time and revenue.
Right now, we are going through a very big process of digital transformation that touches all the areas of business, and that as well has been changing the way we personally move and the way we interact between our personal lives and our business lives. So how do you see these elements of productivity when it comes specifically between the balance of personal and professional? Because I say right now, especially with COVID, we are all working from home. So there's a big challenge of sometimes managing families, managing children, managing business, managing the personal and the professional. Even for us, we use probably the same computers to work and to entertainment. So this creates a lot of new dimensions in the parallels, and as well in the concepts of, or in the sense of productivity. How do you see this specifically in the sense of especially business productivity?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge. It's a challenge for business owners where their team are now working from home to really understand when people are and aren't working. But I think there's a benefit for both sides, the business and the colleagues, of some of the work can be done at different times. So actually, if it fits the individual and the business, could it be done earlier in the morning? Could it be done later in the evening if you've got small kids and kind of they're in bed? So I think it massively opens up that whole flexibility of working debate. I think in the short term, while COVID is where it is, it's fine. I think give it 6, 12, 18 months, and there'll probably be a real drive to get people back into offices and working together. I think from a human interaction point of view, that's vital. I think a lot of the best work gets done around the coffee machine, or what was the photocopier in olden times, where you just have that bumping into somebody chat. and you sort out a problem, or you sort out something that may have taken 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 emails. I think that will come. And I think the other thing we should be mindful of is there's lots of Zoom, Hangouts, Teams meetings, and that fatigues people because they weren't used to those. They weren't used to having their cameras on before we all work from home. And people are bouncing from one Zoom, Hangouts, Teams meeting to the other. And that's fine. But what actually that does stop is you doing any actual work. The emails keep coming in, and the work that you gather from those meetings has to get done at some point. So potentially you end up working longer. On the flip side of that, as we're working from home, there's no travel, there's no commute. So that there is a balance and trade-off of, I think people are probably working slightly longer or the same hours, but actually getting more work done in that because they're not traveling, they're not commuting through. So short term, I think it's fine. Long term, I think there'll be a real, when safe, drive to get people back together, because humans work better when they're around other humans, most of us do. And all the magic happens in those coffee chats.
Completely. So I think the human part, we are humans after all. So, but it's not an easy task. So so you have a couple of case studies that I would like to touch. I think, of course, you have specifically, you've been working with retailers and hospitality giants like Costa, Vodafone, Debenhams, and Pandora. Mm-hmm. Do you want to highlight one specific case study? I think it's very important because I think people only understand things, and me included, when we have like something concrete. So I don't know if you want to talk about or Costa, Vodafone, Debenhams, and Pandora, one of them that you want to highlight, just to highlight some work. Yeah.
Let's use Vodafone because we've probably all got a mobile phone, haven't we? So people can relate to that. So yeah, Vodafone, we've worked with them across 9 markets now, across the world. And what we tend to do for them is spend some time in their shops, and we will follow the teams as they're selling. So we'll do lots of what people would class as time and motion studies, looking at how long it takes to sell all the different types of mobile phone journeys that there are. And you probably wouldn't believe how many there are, those kind of 40 plus, ranging from somebody coming in and just buying a phone with a SIM card, so a pay-as-you-go, as we'd know it, deal, through to people buying contracts, but also now remembering that the likes of Vodafone and their competitors also sell broadband, they also sell TV packages, they also sell Internet of Things, so you can buy a camera for your dog, you can buy security cameras for your house. So they have lots of journeys in there that we measure for them. And again, as I've talked about before, we'll then break that journey down into a number of parts. So how much time was spent with the customer, how much time was spent on the systems, doing security checks, setting up the phone number, the contract, getting the customer to sign, how much time was spent going to get the phone, opening the phone, potentially setting it up with the customer. So that really helps them understand how long the journeys take, where the opportunity in those journeys is to get them quicker so they can throughput more customers, or spend less time on the system and upsell other things. So, sell broadband if somebody's buying a phone, or sell them a TV package. And over the years, what we've helped them do is really understand which of those journeys are the ones to focus on, because they take a long time and don't get completed very often because there's a flaw in the process, or there's a part of that process which the customer gets frustrated in and then gives up on the journey. So over time, we've helped them increase kind of process times and efficiency by about 7 to 10%, depending on which market you're looking at. And that's all around the task, but we also look at how their leaders are spending their time. I've talked about before, the shadowing the management team, and overall how much time they spend with customers, how much time is on task, and how much non-value add or ineffective time there is. And that, what we call efficiency part of the study, with the customer, task, and non-value add time, we benchmark them, understand where there's opportunity across the year or at different times of the year to bring that down, because again, we come back to where they plan their staff doesn't necessarily match their customers coming in. So if you're a store in a big shopping centre, a regional shopping centre, potentially in London, your customer shape, i.e. when your customers shop, will be very different than if you're in a town centre store. So we helped them understand that. And actually one of the big stores in one of the Westfield centres in London, on the back of our last study last year, they invested more colleagues in the evening, so between kind of 5 and 10, and saw a massive incremental sales uplift just because they got the shape wrong. And when we were in store and then to the senior team, we were able to demonstrate the volume of customers coming in, the wait time, some of the drop-off time, and also where they were struggling in terms of the different journeys. So sometimes it's not about saving or cost, sometimes it's about investment at the right times to drive the revenue. So Vodafone one's been really interesting, and the international team really love seeing the variation across the different markets. Some of that's cultural, some of that is the same journey. The other interesting thing for them is some markets have different systems, so it really helps them understand the impact of those system speeds on the overall journey.
Yeah, it's an interesting, and I think a lot of these things are really data and specific insights that you have to look. So one of the things that your work and a lot of your research and as well some of your articles is talking about using data to improve productivity. Can you elaborate on that? Because when you talk about data, first of all, it's very broad and it touches so much different things. And I think especially one of the biggest challenges, what is effectively data? Is the sales data? Is the lead generation? Is the conversions? Is the sum of everything? Is the money that comes on the end of the month? How do you deal with data when it comes to productivity, and especially these details that normally can make a company? For instance, I was talking with an expert as well in technology and as well in business, and he was saying that, for instance, he did one of this best business was something that took literally in the last 10 years, probably 1 or 2 months of work and generated like millions of dollars of revenue. And it was because they focused in solving one specific problem and solving one specific area of the client that was working with them. So how do you look at data with all this complexity that comes attached to it, and as well with all the different tools that we have to manage and the different distractions?
Yeah, data is interesting, and lots of companies have got lots of data but not much information. So data rich, information poor. So one of the things that we do, as I've talked about, is the study work, which provides some really scientific data around the processes and the way that people work. But if I give you an example, so we did some study work with a fashion retailer just towards the end of last year, so September, say 2019. And they had lots of data around till transactions, around number of customers, and all the other metrics that go around it. So the net promoter score, how happy customers were. And we're trying to basically figure out with all that data how they could make the transaction quicker without compromising time with the customer, but without spending much more money because they had a problem with queues. So we looked at the data and they'd looked at the data, and it's a bit of a jigsaw puzzle with productivity. You need probably a couple of data sources sometimes to see the picture. And the bit of data they didn't have was how long a till transaction takes. So we did the study work, and the time was the time. But the biggest bit of the data which helped was looking at what percentage of time was spent paying by cash or card, and the percentage of time that was by contactless. Because at that time, the limit was £35, it's just gone up. But that single bit of data, the percentage of contactless time, coupled with their average transaction value, which was below £35, then the timing data that says, well, by paying by contactless is X seconds, minutes quicker than card or cash, the answer was apparent all of a sudden. So it's really, I think, one, knowing the industry, knowing data, knowing where to look for, but two, sometimes having multiple data sources that you can bring together with the right set of eyes to say, actually, what this is telling us is the answer is not about a new checkout layout, not about millions of pounds investment. It's about training the colleagues when they get the total of the transaction, if it's under the contactless limit, to encourage the customer to pay contactlessly, because by doing that, you can serve another 5, 6, 7, 8 customers per hour, which on the volume of transactions and customers that organisation has is worth X million pounds of sales a year, or Y million pounds of customers walking away because they don't want to stand in the queue. So Yeah, I think you're right. There's lots of data and it's important. Sometimes it's about being really clinical with the scientific facts of study or customer data, but also having to piece 2 or 3 bits of data source together to get that eureka moment of that's the answer.
I think it's going to be increasing more and more difficult because it's kind of, when it comes to data, it's for me at least is a massive issue. And as well, especially getting like the basics in place, because let's say if you're looking at productivity, like you mentioned, for a company, let's say in order to get sales, of course, one thing is the end part of the sale, but there's an entire process that needs to be looking at this. So one of the things as well that you have in your services and as well solutions is the idea of time and motion study. Mm-hmm. I think this is very important. I would like to understand a bit about this, and as well, probably our audience will love this, because I think time is, of course, the biggest asset. And as well, in order to manage time properly is increasing more difficult, but as well more sensitive, because as we have so much distractions, and I reinforce the term distractions, because let's say, like you said, we are in a Zoom call right now interviewing you, and at the same time we have like probably 20 social media interactions. Then we have, I don't know, another 50 emails that will come. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we deliver some concrete things and that we can actually follow up with this. And then we have our children and everything else, our families and so forth. So how do you look at this time and motion study, and as well concrete management of time? Because time management is key.
Yeah, so time and motion studies are where the analysts will go on to the customer's site, and we've got our own software. So we've developed some tablet software where we'll implement time and motion methodologies. So we will break the process down into its component parts. We'll measure that across a number of people. And I've talked about averages before. So we'll see, if I use the till study example again, 10, 20,000 till transactions across a range of days, weeks, stores, locations to come up with that average. So within that till transaction, the time and motion study will be broken down into maybe 15, 16 component parts. And we'll be able to then piece that process back together to get the business average. But as I've talked about before, also look at the outliers. So it's a very observational skill, and you have to be trained and qualified to carry it out. But more and more, we're doing that in offices. We're doing it in different environments to help people understand, as I say, right at the start, which bits of those processes are kind of up for grabs. So which bits are up for improvement, which bits impact the customer, and which bits are kind of the basis of a good process and therefore a productive way of working. I think as technology advances, businesses will also start to look at, for office and home workers, the time they spent doing emails and the time they spent on CRM systems and the time they spent potentially on kind of business social media. I think all those analytics will come from the providers of all those solutions. So there'll almost be a physical time and motion study in the future, but maybe almost a digital one as well, where people can harvest data from all the different service providers, Google, let's say, or Amazon, or whoever's providing that service, to see how often and how long people have interacted with those systems.
Oh, fantastic. And I think this is a key one. So one question now, a quite broader one, is, so with all your experience in productivity and working with major organizations and as well doing a lot of research and having a lot of case studies, what are your views on our present society, especially when it comes to the relationship with technology and digital transformation at large? I'm talking more about the process of digital transformation, and as well, we touched partly, but I would like to understand more like the methodologies that you see that when it comes to productivity.
I think digital transformation is interesting because transformation in the word itself suggests it's very different than the current. So it's not an evolution, it's a revolution. What we see is lots of people, and I mentioned it before, talking about digital transformation, but actually wanting to remove paper. So moving what they currently do into a digital platform. There's very few companies that we work with, unless they're digitally native. So unless they've started as a digital company and moved into bricks and mortar, who have really thought through those digital processes. So click and collect's a good one. Every retailer that you'll know will do click and collect. The process online is typically okay. It falls down when either one, you go to collect the parcel, let's say, and it's not there, or it takes too long for the colleague to go into the back shop and get the parcel, or two, when that process hasn't been mapped or thought out from all the various streams or variants. So a good example, I think, is always if you buy something online and pay with PayPal, if you then take that item back to the store, they can never give you a refund there and then. They have to go and do something in that store to refund it via PayPal. So you leave the store as a customer having handed over the items, probably with no receipt for handing it over, but also not having the money back. So it feels really uncomfortable. So that for me is a good example of where people have tried to transform things digitally and do end-to-end, call it omni-channel, multi-channel, whatever you want to, but there's still flaws in the process. So I think there's still a lot of work to do, and a lot of companies are going through digital transformation. For me, the big thing we've seen is you've got to almost review everything in its entirety and not be scared to almost start again with some of those processes. Just taking what you currently do and trying to make it, or trying to digitize it or put it into an online world rarely works. There's normally some big flaws in the process because it just behaves and works differently in those channels.
So we're going through a massive revolution in the concept of work. You touch automation, we touch a lot of technologies, innovation, and as well, we didn't touch much about artificial intelligence, but we're going to have a lot of changes going forward, and they will be just increasing. So how do you see the future of work and the main trends related with tech and society when it comes to productivity and business operations?
AI, machine learning will play a big part in that. And I think we've only really scratched the surface in those things. So I think there'll be lots of processing, lots of data analytics that are automated. So we can surface insights and actionable insights in any environment we work in a lot quicker without having to do lots of data analysis manually or pull together lots of different sources of data. So I think AI and machine learning will drive those, will lead us to better forecasts. So when I say forecasts, I mean that could be forecasts of goods to order from a manufacturer, goods to put out on the shelf. So I think it will really help streamline and focus organizations on the right things to do, will help people by giving them better, maybe up to the minute data or real-time data to make decisions on, but will also replace some of the mundane work that happens. So again, a good example, if we think of AI, machine learning, automation, is in the future, if I'm a housekeeper in a hotel, my job might not actually be to clean the rooms, but it might be to manage the robot vacuum cleaners, the drones that go and clean the window, the bots that go and make the bed. So there'll still be a need for me, but actually my role will have evolved to be more of a technical role rather than a physical role. And as we've seen the last couple of weeks, you've got things like Amazon launching their Palm Pay. So using the palm of your hand to pay for things. Everything will be streamlined. So paying for things should be streamlined. Data should be streamlined. It should, for those companies that use it well, I think give them a massive competitive edge. The prediction of the future should become much more accurate based on the historic data and the way that the machines will learn about trends and patterns moving forward. So not something I think we should be afraid of. I don't see it as the machines coming to replace us all. I see it as supplementary data. I think the one thing that will happen is jobs will change and people will be managing more technical pieces of equipment or data and probably less manual things, because we'll find easier or more cost-effective ways to do that with AI.
COVID-19, and we touched it, has been making a massive change in our society in the space of the last almost 1 year. We've been actually being completely disrupted. So have you been seeing from your work any kind of case studies, or at least some major areas that you think have been looking at us in terms of our vision to redesign our productivity, and especially looking at technology, social impact with COVID-19? Any specific things that you highlight from your experience in the last 10 months, more or less?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a big trend of people using cash less. So cash is dying out, which has a big impact in lots of organizations that are customer facing. So less cash means you've got less time counting it, less time sending it to be banked. So there's a big productivity saving there. And more contactless payment clearly means that there's a big shift to people wanting to have less contact physically with people when they certainly shop or buy something. So yeah, a big trend of people paying more contactless, more card, less cash, which has its economy. But also a big emphasis on hygiene and standards. So we're seeing lots more time being spent cleaning. Certain organizations having special COVID cleaning requirements for the office, for the store, for door handles, for entrances, for high traffic areas. But also some of those organizations where they've had to invest a lot of money by having people on the front of the store counting people in and out. So some organizations already had what we'd call greeters, but you'll see it lots more in supermarkets, DIY shops, where they've got a resource for every trading hour counting people in and out. So I think there's been some real productivity gains in some areas of business, but there's also been some other areas where there's been a need to spend more time and therefore money and effort because of customers' perception of cleanliness and legal requirements. So I think at the moment it's kind of netting itself out. Wherever we end up with the COVID virus, and hopefully it sooner rather than later, we should see those extra investments in people having to count in and out be replaced by the technology or be less of a requirement. So there should be an overall efficiency gain by people moving away from cash and towards more automated payment, certainly in supermarkets, again, where you've seen lots of self-pay. You can scan the items, you can pay now without pretty much speaking to anybody, have grown in popularity. I think that all those kind of trends will just continue. So it's driven some different behaviours, whether they're temporary or not, time will tell. But yeah, if they're here to stay, people will have to radically rethink their store operation to make sure it's not costing them money and it's at least cost neutral.
You have been working in a podcast that is Workforce Management Series. And what is this series? So can you tell us about this, and as well, where can we find you and find the research and some of the solutions that you've been working, case studies?
Yeah, so we've got the ReThink Productivity podcast, which has been up and running since March. And we've just done a series around workforce management in there, which you can find on our website, rethinkproductivity.co.uk. And that's all around some of the parts I've touched on in this chat around. There's various software solutions out there that you can put lots of business data into, so sales, people's availability, till transaction numbers, and that will then start to help you get the best plan of your available people for those customer service environments against the assumed customer demand. So you get the people in the right place at the right time is the mantra. So you're best when you're busiest. And you can find me on the website. There's case studies, white papers to download there. Also on LinkedIn, if you want to connect, happy to pick up a conversation. So yeah, various ways to find us.
Thank you so much. So Simon, it's been a pleasure, and I think a lot of insights, and I took a lot of notes, and our team as well, especially how to be more productive in these crazy times, but as well a lot of positive ways of looking at this, and I like your pragmatic approach as well to this. So I want to thank you and wishing you all the best success. Thank you so much.
No, you're welcome. Thanks for having me on.